My uncles treated me like a servant until my parents' inheritance changed everything. You guys, I swear my life could be a dark, twisted movie script. For years, I truly believed I was just a burden, a charity case, constantly told I owed everything to the family who took me in. But what if I told you the very people who claimed to save me were actually systematically stealing my future, and then had the audacity to demand even more? When I was just 2 years old, my parents died in a car accident. One day they were there, the next they were gone. I don't remember the details, just the chilling void they left behind. My parents didn't have close relatives, only my mother's brother and his wife, my uncle and aunt. So, I went to live with them. For a 2-year-old, understanding that kind of loss is impossible. I never imagined my life would change so drastically, much less that the place meant to be my safe haven would become a prison masquerading as a home. From my earliest memories, my aunt and uncle constantly burdened me with the feeling that I was a problem, a nuisance. I was never truly part of their family. While their 2 kids, my cousins, grew up showered with privilege, love, and opportunities, I was shoved into the background, practically an informal servant. My days were a blur of cleaning, cooking, and doing every chore no one else wanted. I never had a real childhood. My aunt would often sneer, I grew up without parents too, and no one felt sorry for me. You should be thankful you have a home at all. We saved you from going to an orphanage. And every time they gave me leftovers or clothes that weren't even my cousin's hand-me-downs, they made sure I knew I couldn't expect more. It was like everything they did was a huge sacrifice I had to repay for the rest of my life. The worst part? I actually grew up believing them. I thought they were right, that I did owe them something, that maybe I just needed to try harder, work more, to earn my place in this family. But the harder I tried, the more never enough I became. Life went on like this. Now, I'm about to turn 18. All my life, I thought this was my fate, that I'd never escape. Then, everything changed. It turns out my parents left behind a massive inheritance. I only found out recently, because their will explicitly stated I couldn't access it until I came of age. My aunt and uncle? They knew about it from the very beginning. I can only imagine how many nights they must have dreamt about that money, planning how they'd spend it. With my birthday rapidly approaching, their entire attitude has completely flipped. Suddenly, the same aunt and uncle who called me a burden and belittled me daily are acting like I'm the most important person in the world. My aunt started making me breakfast, something she never did in all these years. Even my uncle asks how I'm doing, as if he genuinely cares. It's so transparent, so utterly shameless, I could hardly hold back from bursting into laughter. The absolute peak of their audacity came when my aunt, with a completely serious face, asked me to return the favor. She said I should give them a portion of the inheritance, in compensation for the years they brought me up. Can you believe it? After treating me like garbage, they want the money my parents left to secure my future? Honestly, I'm furious. But at the same time, this is my chance. I can't change what they did to me, but I can make them pay for it. So here I am, putting my plan together. I don't know if everything will go perfectly, but one thing is certain, I am not giving up that inheritance. It's the only thing I have left from my parents, and I will not let them take it from me. Who knows? Maybe this is finally my moment to get revenge for everything they put me through. Update 1 asterisk. It's been a few weeks, and man, things have escalated in ways I never would have imagined. I took some of your advice and headed straight to the lawyer handling my parents' will. At first, I was so nervous. Talking to a lawyer, dealing with all that formality and complicated legal language, it's not my usual thing. But I knew it was necessary, and boy, was it worth it. At the lawyer's office, I met this older man, incredibly kind and patient. He explained everything to me so carefully and showed me documents I didn't even know existed. There was a detailed breakdown of properties, investments, and money my parents had left for me. Turns out, they didn't just think about securing my future, they did it with an amazing degree of detail. There's a house on the outskirts of the city, savings accounts, bonds, stocks, even a small art collection. Altogether, we're talking about an amount that took my breath away. It's enough money to secure a comfortable life for me and finance any project or dream I might have. He explained that, according to the will, everything had been kept in a trust until I turned 18. My uncle and aunt knew this from the very beginning because they had to sign documents when they took legal responsibility for me. Of course, they never told me anything. But the lawyer also explained something else. Beyond the main inheritance, there was a specific annual amount for my living expenses, money for food, clothes, education, even recreational activities. You and I both know I never saw a single cent of that money. For years, I wore hand-me-downs, often repaired, and ate leftovers. I never got new toys, let alone experience things like vacations or extracurricular activities. All that money was mine, and it was wasted by my aunt and uncle. And the lawyer, bless him, raised the same suspicion. Now, here's where things get interesting. The other day, when I was at school, my aunt and uncle rummaged through my stuff. Yes, they're that intrusive. They found some of the documents the lawyer had given me, which I had naively left in my room. From that moment, the gloves were completely off. Their first reaction was, as always, anger. My aunt confronted me, accusing me of being dishonest for not telling her about the money. According to her, a family doesn't keep secrets. I almost laughed in her face. Seriously? They hid this from me my entire life, and now they have the nerve to play the honesty card? Then my uncle stomped in, using his usual authoritative tone, claiming all the money my parents left was thanks to the family, so it rightfully belonged to them. Then he said something I'll never forget: if it weren't for us, you wouldn't have made it this far. We kept you alive. We sacrificed for you. You owe us. Instead of getting into a screaming match, I decided to take a different approach. I told them I understood their concern, but everything would be decided once I turned 18. It was like giving them a small glimmer of hope, just enough to calm them down. I'm not sure if I'm just a good actor, or if they're so desperate they'll believe anything, but they don't suspect, not yet, that I have radically different plans. Since they learned the actual extent of the inheritance, their behavior has become even more extreme. My aunt now cooks me complicated dinners, whereas before she'd hardly share a plate of scraps. My uncle started asking about my grades in school, something he never gave a damn about. For the first time, my little cousin even seemed to hesitate. I don't know if this is right, he mumbled after my father forced me to skip dinner again. It's all so fake, I can barely refrain from bursting into laughter in their faces. The most shameless moment was overhearing their conversation last night. They were in the kitchen, thinking I was in my room, discussing how they should convince me. My aunt suggested appealing to my sense of family. My uncle interjected that if that wasn't enough, they could lay a guilt trip on me with everything they've spent on me. My oldest cousin weighed in, making the profound revelation that he could help by informing me that sometimes I never even belonged. What they don't know is that I've been writing everything down. Every comment, every attempt at manipulation. My lawyer said that documenting everything could be useful later, especially if they tried something more aggressive, like forcing me to sign something. For now, I'm playing alone, letting them believe they have control. But in my mind, I'm counting the days until my birthday. Once I turn 18, everything will be mine. And they won't have a clue what's coming. This time, I won't be their victim. Update 2 asterisk every single day, something else comes to light that just leaves me utterly shocked. It's not just about my aunt and uncle trying to dupe me out of the inheritance anymore. Now, everything makes sense. From the very beginning, they saw me as nothing more than a tool to solve their problems. It's like all the jigsaw pieces are finally clicking into place, and the resulting picture couldn't be more disturbing. It all started a few days ago when I decided to go through the old boxes my aunt and uncle kept stored in the attic. My intentions weren't even serious at first. I was just trying to find a picture, anything that connected me to my parents. All my life, they had told me there was nothing of mine left, but for some reason, I just felt like I needed to check for myself. What I found wasn't just a confirmation of my suspicions, it was an eye-opener to a truth I had never wanted to admit. My aunt and uncle have been stealing from me since the day they took me in. Among the boxes, I found some documents that should never have been there. The first thing to catch my attention was a bank statement from the monthly fund my parents had left for my living expenses. As I said, I already knew about it from the lawyer, but it looks very different on paper. For years, my aunt and uncle had been receiving substantial amounts for covering my needs. I'm talking about enough for me to have a good life, where I would get new clothes every now and then, eat well, even go on some extracurricular activities or school trips. What did they do with that money? Absolutely nothing for me. All I ever got were leftovers, hand-me-downs, and a thin mattress in the back of a storage room, while they remodeled the kitchen, bought new furniture, and took my cousins on nice trips to places like Disney and Cancun. I found receipts and bills that showed everything I had been suspecting. For instance, while I walked to school in torn shoes, they were spending hundreds of dollars on designer brands for my cousins. But the most gut-wrenching part? When I turned 10 years old, my paternal grandparents sent me a birthday check. I never saw it. Instead, my aunt cashed it and used the money to buy a brand new television. The worst discovery of all, the letters. In another box, a bundle of yellowed envelopes lay there, addressed to me. They were sent by my grandparents, living in a different country. All the letters said how much they wanted to see me, wanted me to visit them. But my aunt and uncle never told me anything about them. In fact, I grew up believing my grandparents didn't want anything to do with me, because that's what my aunt and uncle told me. And the worst part? They didn't just ignore the letters. Among the documents, I found a reply letter my aunt had written back to them. She actually told them they needn't bother visiting me because I was doing fine and didn't need the stress of meeting strangers. Strangers. That's how they referred to my grandparents, the only people in the world who, aside from my parents, gave a damn about me. After reading those letters and going through all the documents, I just sat there on the attic floor in silence. I felt a mix of rage, sadness, and something close to helplessness. But I refused to let it break me. I knew I could use all of this to my advantage. Immediately, I took photos of everything. My attorney had already been apprised of what I found, and he assured me that this only serves to strengthen my case. Not only is it now crystal clear that they embezzled money earmarked for me, but they also intentionally isolated me from any form of emotional support. Since these discoveries, I've started noticing how erratic my aunt and uncle's behavior has become. I think they are finally realizing things aren't going the way they planned. Nowadays, my aunt is calling and crying all the time, telling me that she doesn't want to lose the family. As for my uncle, he's getting even more aggressive, at least give credit where it's due. You could mention how much you owed us after everything we have done for you. My cousins? They keep being overly friendly in an obvious, insincere attempt, clearly instructed by their parents. So for the moment, I'm keeping my distance. Everything I find, I document. Everything they say, I write down. Every attempt at manipulation is being recorded. I feel like I'm building an arsenal, just waiting for the perfect moment to use it. My birthday is getting closer, and with each passing day, they are one day closer to not being able to keep this act up any longer. They could have been different. But at the same time, that's exactly what keeps me going. I can't change the past, but I can make them pay for everything they did to me. Update 3 asterisk. It has been a few weeks since I updated last, and finally, things are reaching a critical point. Since then, I've been planning every single move so carefully because I know I cannot afford to make a mistake. After all, my aunt and uncle have shown they will do whatever it takes, lie, manipulate, control, anything they can to keep what doesn't belong to them. But now, I have something they never expected, proof and knowledge. First, I let them continue their little act. My aunt kept making meals I'd never seen before in this house. My uncle started including me in family conversations, as if I had suddenly become part of the clan. It was almost funny watching them struggle so hard, knowing what was in my hands. But I let them feel confident, this actually had a purpose. I even went as far as saying out loud to thank them for all they'd done for me, just to see their faces light up with satisfaction. The more confident they got, the more open to attack they would become. Then, one evening after dinner, my aunt took me aside for a serious talk. She looked at me with feigned concern in her eyes and told me that she and my uncle had been thinking a lot about my future. According to her, they were the only ones who truly knew what I needed in life, and that's why, for the good of everyone, I should give them most of the inheritance. "We're not asking for everything," she said, her voice almost plaintive, "just enough to compensate for the years of sacrifice we gave to you. You're young, you don't need that much money now. We can manage it better and make sure you don't squander it." That was when I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I pulled out my discreetly kept phone from my pocket and used it to expose the recording between her and me. In just seconds, the contours of her face transformed from pride to absolute surprise. "What is that?" she panted. "That's evidence of what you've been up to," I firmly stated, as steadfastly as I could get my voice to go. "And that is not the only thing that I do possess." That same night, I decided to give them an ultimatum. I showed them the photos of the documents I found in the attic, the receipts, my grandparents' letters, the proof of how they had spent the money meant for me. I explained that I had already shared everything with my lawyer, and that if they kept trying to manipulate me, I'd have no problem taking this to the authorities. The panic in their eyes was almost satisfying. My uncle, who had always been the most authoritative and self-assured, now began to sweat and mumble excuses. My aunt, on the other hand, burst into tears, saying over and over again that she did it for the family. Their excuse, their attempts at justification, sounded pathetic. For the first time in my life, I felt true power. But that was not all that night held. Before retiring to my room, I made one thing crystal clear: no longer would they be in control of the narrative. I let them know that I knew precisely how much the inheritance was worth, and wasn't about to give up 1 cent. What they had to do, if they wanted to get back into my good books, which actually was only said to keep them at bay, was stop all the manipulative mechanisms and finally learn to act their age. Next morning, the house was quiet. No grand breakfast, no forced talks. It was as if my ultimatum had sucked them dry of the energy to keep up the charade. But I knew this wasn't over. At this point, it went without saying that they weren't going to let go that easily. My next move? Reaching out to my grandparents, the very people my aunt and uncle had spent my whole life trying to keep away from me. It was a tough conversation, because they had no idea what had really happened. But when I told them the truth and sent them pictures of the letters they had written to me, they couldn't hold back their tears. They said for years they were trying to contact me and had thought of going to court, but my aunt and uncle finally managed to get them to stop. Now, my grandparents are furious, and rightly so. They promised to do all they could for me and told me once I reached 18, they would help me take control over everything. They even invited me to move in with them if I wanted to get away from this house immediately. And although that was comforting to hear, I chose to stay a while. I wasn't leaving until I made sure my aunt and uncle paid for what they did. Since then, small changes have started to occur. My aunt at times tries talking with me, but now even her tone is fearful, not manipulative. My uncle can barely look me in the eyes. My cousins, probably not fully grasping the gravity of what was going on, kept their distance. In a few days, it's going to be my birthday, and I will feel closer to justice. For now, I'm playing my role, keeping everything looking as normal as possible on the surface. But inside, I'm counting the days. When the time comes, my aunt and uncle won't have a clue what's about to hit them. Update 4*. Yesterday was my birthday. And after years of enduring abuse, lies, and manipulation, I finally took matters into my own hands. This was the day I had been waiting for forever, ever since I found out about the inheritance, and I made sure that nothing and no one could ruin it. I won't lie, I was nervous. This wasn't just a step toward independence, it was the culmination of years of suffering, something I couldn't afford to ignore. The day started in the most surreal way possible. My aunt and uncle, who usually either forgot my birthdays or gave me some cheap trinket just so they could say they did, actually tried to throw me a little party at home. They decorated the dining room with those cheap balloons and bought a store-bought cake, acting like they actually cared. Today we celebrate how grateful we are to have you in our family. Grateful. That word was almost comical coming from them. I forced myself to smile, clap along with the cake cutting, and play along with their desperate attempts at resembling a happy family. I knew exactly why they did all that, and time was running out for them. Now that I was 18, the trust fund officially fell into my hands. What they didn't know, though, was that my real birthday gift was already in motion. I was supposed to meet my attorney later that afternoon. It was at noon, but I had told my aunt and uncle that I would be going out with friends so that they would not suspect anything. As I went out, my aunt gave me a forced smile and said, "Keep in mind, you can always depend on us. We are family." I walked into the lawyer's office filled with more determination than ever. He had everything ready, the papers needed to officially transfer control of all assets into my name, along with a detailed breakdown of what signing those papers would mean. It was an indescribable feeling. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had real power in my hands. But this wasn't just about taking control, I also wanted my aunt and uncle to answer for what they had done. The lawyer explained that while they had spent money which was legally mine, proving that they had done so illegally might be tricky. However, the letters, the receipts, and the documented abuse over the years were more than enough to back up my case. We concluded the best course of action was to issue a legal ultimatum, return the stolen money or deal with a formal lawsuit. After that meeting, I felt so relieved, like a load had been lifted off my back. But the most intense moment of my day still awaited me, my aunt and uncle. The confrontation. That afternoon, I came home, pretending it was just like any other day. My aunt was in the kitchen, and my uncle sat in front of the TV. They were so unwound, probably thought their manipulations still worked. I sat down on the couch in front of them and said, "We need to talk." No time was wasted. Today, I turned 18, and I just took control of my parents' inheritance. Dead silence fell inside the room. My uncle stared at me, disbelieving his ears. My aunt, on the other hand, tried to feign excitement. "That's great, sweetheart. We knew this day would come, and we're so proud of you." I let her talk. I wanted them to think, just for a moment, that everything was fine. Then, I pulled out a copy of the ultimatum my lawyer had prepared and laid it on the table in front of them. "This is what's going to happen from now on." I laid everything out. I had proof of how they had misused the money meant for my living expenses. I explained to them in detail what they bought with the money inappropriately, and referred to my grandparents' letters which they kept from me. Then, I made it crystal clear, if they didn't return the money after a reasonable time, my attorney would file an actual lawsuit. My aunt immediately burst into tears, telling me that she could not believe I was doing this, that everything they did was out of love. My uncle was furious. He yelled that I was ungrateful, that they had given me everything, and that I had no right to treat them this way after all their sacrifices. I stood my ground. I told them they could no longer control or manipulate me. I reminded them that I had legal backing, and if they tried anything, they would only make things worse for themselves. The best part? My cousin's reaction. My aunt had by now begun to cry, and my uncle was screaming, when my oldest cousin stepped forward. "I just can't keep quiet anymore." His voice shook. "I saw what you did. You stole his money. You lied to him. I don't want to be like you." My aunt gasped. My uncle clenched his fists. But the damage was done. I think for the first time, they realized that something was seriously wrong with their so-called perfect family. Having said what I wanted to, I rose and told them that I was thinking of moving in with my grandparents. I made it clear I no longer depended on them, and from this moment forward, things were going to be very different. I left that house without looking back, feeling a sense of freedom I had never felt. That night, I slept over at a friend's place, just to create some distance between us as I figured out my next move. My lawyer had already sent them the formal ultimatum, and now I was just waiting for their response. I wasn't really expecting them to take it lying down, but to be frank, I didn't care. I was ready for whatever came next, because finally, I was in control of my life. Final update *, it's now time to admit to myself that, at last, justice has finally prevailed. It has been 1 month since my birthday, and I can say with absolute satisfaction that I have finally gotten the justice I longed for. I have not only taken back my life, but I've also let everyone see my aunt and uncle for the rotten people they were, completely ruining that perfect picture they struggled so hard to portray as an ideal family. It has been a whirlwind of emotions this last month, but every single step led me to this moment. They wanted to ruin me, but in the end, I was the one who tore down their facade. Things started to spiral downward for them immediately after the legal ultimatum. At first, they tried to ignore it, pretending it wasn't a serious issue. My uncle, as arrogant as ever, told me, "You have nothing. If you were really going to sue us, you would have done it already." My aunt, in turn, resorted to appealing to my compassion, pleading that I reconsider. "Do you want your cousins to suffer because of this? It would hurt them more than it will us." But I wasn't about to back down. I let my lawyer continue with the case. A few days later, they received a formal court summons, and that's when everything truly started to fall apart for them. Their first big mistake: my uncle's financial secrets. I soon learned my uncle had a much darker financial history than I had ever imagined. It turned out that he had used part of my trust fund money to cover personal debts, including late mortgage payments and credit card bills. This was not only morally disgusting, but it also happened to be utterly illegal. My lawyer made sure this became a key part of the lawsuit, and the resulting legal consequences just left them shaking. What about my aunt? Her victim act fell apart the instant my lawyer presented evidence that she had hidden my grandparents' letters. That alone, while not as financially damaging as my uncle's fraud, painted an even clearer picture of intentional manipulation and isolation. For me, that emotional damage was every bit as unforgivable as the financial fraud. Desperate attempts to escape consequences. My aunt and uncle did everything in their power to escape any consequences. First, they tried to countersue me. They said I was being unfair, that my claims were ungrateful. But their lawyer, who was no match for mine, of course, made it very clear they had no leg to stand on legally. Then they tried to settle with me in private, offering to give me some of the money they'd stolen if I would drop the case. Of course, I refused the deal outright. This wasn't about the money. This was about justice. About revenge. About everything they had done to me. The truth goes public. As the case moved forward, something unexpected happened. The community started to find out what was going on. My lawyer had filed all the necessary documents in court, and since this involved inheritance fraud, parts of the case became public record. Neighbors, friends, and acquaintances of my aunt and uncle started to realize they weren't the perfect family they pretended to be. The coup de grace? The arrival of my grandparents. In the time since I reunited with them, my grandparents had been my closest allies, and they were not going to sit around while all this was happening. So they decided to do something. They came from abroad to attend one of the pretrial hearings in court. And then they did something which I will never forget. They confronted them face to face in the hall outside the courtroom. My grandmother is a small woman, but very strong. She went up to my aunt and said, her voice shaking but firm, "You stole our grandson from us for 16 years. Now we're going to make sure you pay for every single day he suffered." My aunt and uncle had nothing to say. My aunt broke down in tears, while my uncle merely looked away. That was the moment I knew they had already lost. Not just the case, but any power they had ever held over me. The day of the settlement. Not having any defense against this in court, my aunt and uncle were left with no choice but to settle. They had to return a lion's share of the money they had embezzled. And to do that, they had to sell their house. Yes, they had to sell the very house where they treated me like a servant for years. Something so poetically powerful in watching them lose the place they valued so much, the same place where they humiliated me, belittled me, and made me feel like nothing. But that wasn't all. They also agreed to pay extra damages for the emotional distress they had caused, something they never expected, of course. No amount of money in this world could ever erase what I went through, but knowing that every cent they give me is a reminder of their defeat? That's good enough for me. The aftermath. After the settlement, their lives completely fell apart. The friends that were praising their sacrifices for me? They cut them off. Even their children, my cousins, began to resent them for selling out the stability of our family. I hear they're living in a studio apartment now, and my uncle works extra hours just to keep his head above water. And me? I went to live with my grandparents. They took me in with open arms, and for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm in a home filled with love and respect. For the first time, I'm planning my future, something I was never able to do while living under my uncle and aunt's control. Maybe I'll study, travel, or simply enjoy my newfound freedom. But the best part? I'm no longer afraid. They were the ones holding all the cards for so long, but now I know justice exists. Anything can be achieved by patience and determination. I'm done with my revenge, and they realize that every single thing they chose to do to bring me down was what exactly brought them to this place, to the brink of their destruction. Bye-bye.